I think the question is agreed by majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Members' motion with no legislative effect. Mr. Andrew Lam will move a motion on reviewing the long-term housing strategy to shorten the home ownership ladder. 5 members will move amendments to the motion. This council will proceed to a joint debate on the motion and the amendments. Later, I will first call upon Mr. Andrew Lam to speak and move the motion. Then I will call upon Dr. Chow Man Kong, Mr. Tang Li Chair, Mr. Kenneth Leung, Mr. Stanley, and Mr. Louis Loong to speak in sequence, but they may not move the amendments at this stage. The joint debate now begins. Members who wish to speak, please press the requested button. Now I call upon Mr. Andrew Lam to speak and move the motion. Thank you, President. I move that the motion as printed on the agenda be passed. 10 years ago, the long-term housing strategy was announced. In the introduction, it says that we need to implement the long-term housing strategy so young people will again have confidence that they will eventually own better and affordable housing. Now, there are several points in the long-term housing strategy. First, we need to make early planning for public housing. And 2, we need to keep amending the target for rolling 10-year target. And 3, we need to provide a safety net for those who cannot afford private housing. Fourthly, we need to have subsidized sales of flats for the medium to low income groups. And fifthly, we need to ensure stable land supply if necessary. There's need to implement demand-side measures to ensure the stable development of the private housing market. Now, for this term, the government has been acting swiftly, so it's now exceeded its target of housing supply. And recent years, in recent weeks, it removed the demand-side measures. But recently, we've heard much discussion about people starting to queue wait list for public rental housing from the age of 18. And some people can never think they can never afford to buy their own home, so they rather just spend on cars. And then some, when they have a job, they will make sure they don't get promotion or get a raise in wage and so on, so that they will remain eligible for public rental housing. The Secretary for Housing has openly appealed to the public not to lie flat just because they want to be allocated public rental housing. Well, there's reason for this concern. Figures prove that in the past 2 decades, there are 20%. There's a 20% increase in the number of waitlist applicants, and so that eats up the additional supply we have. And then now the waiting time is longer than 3 years. Now, for those waitlisting for public rental housing, some 30% are below the age of 30, and then in 2027 it was 22.1%. And then 2019 is dropped to 7.6% in terms of home ownership by young people. So that's a serious drop. So there is an overall drop in the home ownership ratio for young people. And then now the home ownership ratio as a whole is less than that in other wealthy economies. If we look at supply and the target ratio, if we go by the ratio, does it mean that there is a smaller demand for public rental housing? Will there be an increase in home ownership ratio? Will people still feel a stronger sense of happiness and well-being? Now, in the past decade, when the economy was doing well and it was an ultra-low interest environment, people could not feel a sense of happiness of owning their home, and it's actually our failure. Now, we have a stable and safe society for us to develop an economy. There is sufficient land supply. The system for creating land is also working well. So I would urge the government to review the long-term housing strategy to come up with more forward-looking policies. It should review the private to public housing sector ratio. And now, of course, people either rent or buy a home. And for those who buy a home, they need to be able to afford one. So that's why we need a housing ladder. So for those who wish to own their homes, they will be able to achieve that sooner. Now, there may be various ways for us to achieve that. That's why I am moving this motion so that we could have some brainstorming here. We're going to help the government come up with ideas, and then they could take resolute actions to shorten the home ownership ladder. Now, but the whole reason of helping people to buy homes is so that they can have a happy home. Buying a home means improving housing condition, and then people will feel a sense of security, and then they could plan for their future. Now, we by having a good home doesn't mean moving from a subdivided unit to just bought bed space. That's not what we mean by home ownership ladder. So there has to be various support, such as financial support and so on. Now, we consider various subsidy schemes for home ownership. That is the White Form Secondary Market Scheme, First-Time Home Buyer Scheme, and so on. There is mortgage guarantee and so on for those who have household income below $74,000, so they could all benefit from these schemes, and that covers some 80% of the population. So what is the government not doing enough? That's why the home ownership ratio is not satisfactory. Now, if there is a 10-time oversubscription of HOS flats, that means the response is poor. So that shows that the government is not building enough HOS. There's a small production. The government has heard loud and clear where there's need to adjust the ratio of public rental housing to subsidized sales flat. But then the government says that it will do so in the next 5-year period. That is from 2029 to 30 to 33 to 34, when there is substantial increase in public rental housing. Then the government will review the ratio of PRH to SSF. But when is considered the appropriate time? We know that the design standards for PRH and SSF are very different, so they are not really interchangeable. And then from planning to production, it takes some 6-7 years. If you do the review now, that means we'll only see results after 10 years. And if the government is going to wait another 3 or 4 years before we review the ratio, then I will still ask the young people to start queuing up for public housing. It's like, getting a Mark 6 ticket, that's all. So if the government is not acting quickly enough, can we ask the private market to help? In the past, the government has come up with another scheme, e-residence by URA for better quality subsidized housing. And then there are other schemes to help people buy private housing at discount of market price. So these schemes, we have yet to see how effective they are in helping the public. But when the market is going down, then there will be more restrictions. And if we want to help more people, we could consider the mortgage ratio and also the mortgage period. We could extend the period, and so then the threshold for buying a home is lower, and the monthly mortgage is also less. For groups with different levels of affordability, there could be different subsidized schemes with different measures. There's no need to have too many varieties in the home ownership ladder, because the whole purpose is about helping people buy their homes. Now, in those days, the government did not offer assistance for first-time home buyers because it was afraid that that will add to speculation. But now there's no more speculation, so the government needs to adjust its policy as soon as possible. It shouldn't just keep wait and see attitude, and then next they will consider what to do before it actually does anything. Then young people now will be in the middle age and still they don't see any hope. So there's a need for us to review the long-term housing strategy and shorten the home ownership ladder. There's no better time to do so than now. I will listen carefully to members' views, and I so speak.
議題係林筱魯議員嘅議案，予以通過。周明光議員。
主席，特區政府早喺
Mr. Chow Kong. In 2014, the government rolled out the long-term housing strategy. We have a series of subsidized sale flats, including the home ownership scheme, HOS. These schemes for the households with low to middle income, HOS is a step for them to get hold of a home, and HOS will help mobility or upward mobility of the people, and it will help PRH households with higher income to purchase a flat so that we can have flats made available for people waiting for it. So HOS or SSFs is one of the rung on the housing ladder, and then for the next step, people should go for private housing. So subsidized sale flat is a step for people to achieve upward mobility, and it will also help the more well-off PRH households achieve home ownership. As long as the PRH households get a hold of an SSF unit, they can make available their PRH unit for people in need. And the government will not have to identify land for construction of housing, and this also help grassroots families. In 2022 policy address, the chief executive said that housing issue is the top priority of the government. We see that this terms of the government has shown determination to solve the housing issue. The original motion moved by Mr. Andrew LAM is very important. My amendment is with HOS and is to reflect the intent and proposals of G19. We want to promote circulation of HOS and SSFs. I would like to thank the Chief Executive and the Secretary for Housing for taking on board G19 members' proposals to extend the mortgage default guarantee period to 50 years. The period has been extended from 30 to 50 years, and it was effective since 1st of March 2024. This will make available 200,000 HOS units with no premium paid, and this can help PRH households with green farm get a longer mortgage period so that they can achieve home ownership. As the next step, I propose that we still have to remove barriers. For example, we can look at the figures with the white farm secondary market scheme. There are 60,000 young people aged below 35. There were only 200 applications that were successful. There is a 4 in 1,000 chance for these young people to get hold of a subsidized sale flat. I think that the government have to increase the quotas for white farm secondary market scheme. They should raise the quota from 4,500 to 20,000 per year. The government will not incur any extra cost in this, but this will help make available PRH units. If we can increase the annual quota for single-person household, this can help unleash the supply of HOS units and encourage people to participate in the secondary market of the HOS units and revitalize the property market. As to how we can continue to increase the supply of secondary HOS units, some senior citizens worried that after selling their SSFs, they will not be able to purchase another flat because they will lose their qualification to purchase a secondary, HOS units in the secondary market. I hope that the Housing Bureau can help these senior citizens who have sold their unit to change to another unit of a larger size. This will help with the circulation of HOS units and PRH flats as well. For the mortgage default guarantee period, we think that we should increase that from 50 to 60 years because the 50-year guarantee period will no longer be applicable to some of the HOS units. We think that by extending the period, people will not have to be worried about their flats having the guarantee period expired. Thank you. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, President. Now, although the prices of the property has gone down recently, people are still unable to afford private housing, and the supply for SSF is very low, and a lot of people could not get hold of one. For young people, they have given up hope on home ownership. They see getting hold of PRH units as their goal. Some young people have given up on achieving upward mobility, and they would rather work freelance in order not to be ineligible for PRH units. This kind of a situation is very unhealthy, and this affects the people's aspiration for upward mobility and undermine the development of Hong Kong. The government is now increasing housing supply. Recently, I've been urging the government to review their policy that is tilted in favor of public housing to achieve this goal of helping people achieve upward mobility. And also, we need to encourage capable households to purchase their own flats. I've raised 5 points in my amendments. First, I think that we should review the public-private housing split. Second, we need to review the ratio of public rental housing to subsidized sale flats in public housing to increase the number of starter homes for Hong Kong resident schemes, green farm subsidized HOS scheme, subsidized sale flat, and so on. Third, I think that we have to optimize the balloting and allocation mechanism for SSFs. 4 years ago, I proposed to help applicants who were not allotted a flat a higher priority by according them with an extra slot or quota. Some people recommend allocating flats to single-person household directly. There are a number of ways to do that. I think that we can, for example, establish a register or waiting list for subsidized sale flat. My fourth point, I think that we should introduce the concept of rent-to-own and progressive payment mortgage. That is an advanced version of the tenant purchase scheme for young people and young household to rent subsidized sale flat of a higher rent without having to pay down payment or pay very little down payment. They can draw down a lower mortgage loan and repay for a certain percentage of the price, and then eventually increase the mortgage loan. And eventually they can sell the flat to the government. It means that the government is just saving for the young families. This may sound complicated, but actually a lot of property developers offer such a scheme. My last point, I think that we should formulate standards for the average living space per person and ratio of housing expenses. There is such a stipulation for PRH units. There is a lowest size or standard size for average living space for per person, but we don't have relevant standards for private housing. The government is trying to bid farewell to low-quality subdivided units. I think that it's important to raise the average living space per person as well. For people living in subdivided units, I think that the government should roll out relevant requirements so that people can live in a better and larger space. Previously, the government could not achieve this because there was not enough relevant conditions to do so. I think that it's time for the government to take action. Mr. Stanley Ng.
係香港嘅長期盾之一。
Mr. Andrew LAM talked about reviewing the long-term housing strategy and shortening the housing ladder. Well, I support the motion. FTUN I have been concerned about the housing issue, and we advocate this idea that houses are for living in, not for speculation. And I think that we should suppress speculation and we should bid farewell to subdivided units. I want to stress that the government need to set the goal for long-term housing strategy clear, and we have to advocate this policy of houses are for living in, not for speculation. And we have dispensed with the cooling measures. The market does not have a clear direction. I hope that the government will roll out relevant policy to reassure people. For the measures proposed by Mr. Lam, for example, we should review the private-public housing split and optimize the balloting and allocation mechanism for subsidized sale flats. I think that these are quite basic kind of requirements. For progressive payment mortgage, we have had such a discussion 2 years early. Assuming that the income level of people would progress with inflation, people would be able to afford houses of a higher price. But there is uncertainty in the next 10 years. If you want to roll out this progressive payment mortgage system, the government have to take into consideration a basket of factors. Can we allow the property owner to extend the second phase of the mortgage loan repayment period? As for rent-to-own concept, does it apply to PRH or SSFs? In the private market, some developers roll out this idea of a rent-to-own, but they apply only to property of a higher price. If we apply this idea of rent-to-own in PRH, it is quite difficult. And we propose this idea of tenant purchase scheme, and it seems that the government have rejected the entire idea. For SSFs, I think that we just have to have the people pay mortgage payment, and we don't need to roll out any mortgage systems. I think that we have to roll out 2 targeted measures, including increasing the supply of subsidized sale flat and to set up a home ownership fund to subsidize young people to purchase uncompleted HOS flats. The goal of the former is very clear. We have to work on the supply of subsidized sale flat to meet the demand. As for the latter idea, let me explain about it. In the policy address announced last year, in response to it, we proposed to allow young people aged between 18 to 35 purchase uncompleted HOS flats. In the 3 new development areas, including Kutong Fanlin North, Hongshui Q Hachun, and Yunlong South, new development area, set aside a number of SSF flats so that young people can purchase uncompleted HOS flat without having to pay down payment. For the tax concessions, well, the government should provide tax concessions for young people so that they can get hold of an HOS flat more easily. President, SSF is an important step on the road to home ownership for young people. And I think that we should have a reasonable price in terms of our housing, and we should link the price of the SSF with that of the private housing. I hope that the government will be determined enough to decouple the price of SSF and private housing so that people can actually achieve home ownership. President, I hope that the members will support my amendments and the original motion. Thank you.
Mr. Louis Loong. Deputy President. Now, for Mr. Andrew Lam's original motion and other members' amendments, I support them all. I am moving an amendment because I would like to guide our discussion in a different angle. Now, for long-term housing strategy, there should be another level of significance, that is to allow Hong Kong people to have a sense of belonging. Then they will see Hong Kong as their home, and together they will build a better future. Now, for the vision of long-term housing strategy, the vision is to encourage more people to own their homes. But then by 2014, in the long-term housing strategy, vision is no longer there. There was a chief executive who thought that Hong Kong people ought to own their own homes, and they need to have better and bigger homes. So that's the reason why we have the housing ladder. Hong Kong people are enterprising. They want to move up the social ladder, and so it's the same for the housing ladder. And the government wants to support that with policies so that Hong Kong people could eventually own their homes. So it was a grand vision, but then there was the Asian financial turmoil. So this vision was crushed, and then from then on, the government had to work hard to provide sufficient public rental housing, so there's no way it could increase the ratio of home ownership. But then situation has changed now. After the effort of the different governments, now we have enough supply for future land supply for future housing. 2 weeks ago, Ms. Ho, the secretary, said that to young people that they should focus rather on buying their homes rather than public rental housing. And I would encourage young people to set an even higher goal, and then they will not just go for subsidized sales flats, but their own homes in the private market. Now, for public rent housing, you don't own them, you can't pass it to your children. As for subsidized sale flats, it's for the government to decide where you can live. But then it's only when you own your own homes you decide how big your home is, how you want to do it up, and so on. And then your home is your real estate. It's part of your asset, part of your wealth. Real estate, because it's an asset that is there. So an estate means that it's something you can pass on to your children. So then you have a home, that's where your roots are, and then so you will see Hong Kong as your home, and that's what we mean about sense of belonging. Now, we've been united with the motherland for 26 years. If, say, we've been completing a puzzle, and then last week we completed the scrutiny and passed the National Safeguarding National Security Bill. So finally, we've put the last piece in the puzzle. The puzzle is now complete. When a country is safe, then our home is safe, and that's the key for fostering a sense of belonging. And by encouraging people to buy homes has always been an effective way to further enhance the sense of belonging. So the government should seize upon this opportunity to include the home ownership ratio again in the long-term housing strategy. It should be one of the key objectives for the housing ladder. And then in terms of policy, the government needs to give various support. First of all, it must respect market discipline. It must no longer interfere with the market artificially. Secondly, it must keep the market open, so people have more choices in the homes they want to buy. Thirdly, the government needs to relax the criteria for mortgage insurance and relax the mortgage ratio, so people could buy their first homes more easily. And then fourthly, we need to increase the home ownership ratio so there is a wider housing ladder. I urge the government to review the long-term housing strategy. The aim should be to help people to buy their homes so there is a stronger sense of belonging, and that together we can work together for a better future for Hong Kong. Secretary for Housing.
Madam Deputy, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Andrew LAM for moving the motion today, and 5 other members for moving the amendments. Housing policy has always been close to the heart of the government and the public. No matter how society changes over the past 5 decades, the public housing of the Housing Authority has been playing a pivotal role in fostering social stability and development. Today's motion is important as it is timely for us to have in-depth exchanges on various aspects of the housing issue. When we look at the housing ladder, we have to look at the history. Public housing policy has undergone some major developments. In the 1950s, there was only private housing in Hong Kong. Because of a fire disaster in a squatter area, the government had to provide accommodation to residents. That marked the beginning of the public housing in Hong Kong. Public rental housing has always been a form of affordable and low-cost housing to the grassroots to alleviate the housing needs of the low-income families. It also enables them to improve their lot and help their children achieve upward mobility. It is a solid foundation for stable society. There is an abundance of such examples in Hong Kong. I believe that we'll hear many of such wonderful stories of upward mobility in this chamber today. With economic development, people's income grows. The lower and middle groups began to aspire for home ownership, but the private housing was beyond their reach. So the Housing Authority started a home ownership scheme in 1976, and the first phase was put up for sale in 1978. Apart from letting low and income middle families own their own homes, HOS also enable the PRH tenants to move up the social ladder, and their vacated PRH units will be reallocated to the needy families. That has facilitated the turnover of public housing and the formation of a housing ladder which is fit for purpose. In 1997 and 1998, the Hong Kong government introduced the HOS secondary market scheme and the TPS, respectively, to provide more choices. Due to the Asian financial turmoil, the HA suspended HOS in 2002. We experienced a prolonged period of low interest rates. The investment sentiment was heated. Hot money flowed into the stock and property markets. Many families were priced out of the market because of the soaring property prices. The government introduced demand-side management measures in 2010 to address the exuberance and the mismatch in the property market. We resumed the HOS in 2011 with a new round relaunched in 2014. However, from planning to implementation, we have to go through a lot of procedures like town planning, EIA, and also vetting by LegCo. And this coupled with the political chaos, the supply of land was pretty tight. At the initial stage of resumption, only 2,000 to 3,000 units were put up for sale at any one time, resulting in oversubscription, like Mr. Lam said. In 2014, for example, there was an oversubscription of about 62 times and 30 times subsequently. To address the demand, the government announced the Long-Term Housing Strategy, LTHS, in December 2014 to map out a strategic direction to reverse the imbalance. Guided by the principles of supply-led and flexibility, guided by these two principles, the government will update the LTHS projections on an annual basis with a rolling supply target for the coming 10 years and dynamically make adjustments in response to social, economic, and market changes. To further meet the homeownership needs, the HA launched the pilot green form HOS in 2016, or GHS. The scheme went down pretty well with the tenants and was regularized in 2018. Under the one-for-one arrangement, it achieved the dual purpose of meeting the ownership aspirations of the green form buyers and the PRH applicants' desire for rental housing. To address the needs of white form applicants, the HA launched a pilot scheme in 2013 and 2015 to allow white form applicants to purchase flats with premium not yet paid in the HOS secondary market, which was regularized in 2017. As the number of PRH applicants grew to over 155,000 by the end of 2017, the government decided to ramp up the supply to meet the demand by adjusting the ratio of supply of public to private housing from 60-40 to 70-30 starting from 2018, with a view to shortening the waiting time for PRH. To tap into market forces, foster PPP and encourage private developers to participate in the subsidized sale flats, the government announced in June 2023 the private subsidized sale flat, or private SSF. There are two modes of development, the public tender approach and the private land approach. Under the public tender approach, the government will put up sites for tender with view to leveraging the private sector capacity to develop subsidized sale flats. The government will invite tenders for a project at Cheung Man Road, Taiwan, tomorrow. 700 flats will be made available. The deadline is July 19th. Under the private land approach, the government will offer a concessional land premium to incentivize private developers to provide land for the development of subsidized sale flats so as to unleash the potential, thereby boosting supply. In addition, to assist those who are above the HOS eligibility criteria but cannot afford private housing, the government launched the Home Starter Loan Scheme. Applicants must be Hong Kong residents for 7 years, have never been a homeowner in Hong Kong. Their income limit is white form income limit plus 30%, and the asset limit is also a white form limit plus 30%. Apart from the Anderson Road project in 2021, providing no less than 1,000 units, the Urban Renewal Authority has also launched a project with about 750 flats up for sale, and the government is now taking forward 3 other projects with 6,600 flats in total. The homeownership ladder in Hong Kong today has its unique historical background, and it is closely bound up with the socio-economic conditions over the years. We are carving our own path. The homeownership ladder is intertwined, providing home buyers with various choices and flexibly catering to the different pathways to ownership. And each of the homeownership ladders has its own clear positioning in terms of pricing, size, design, and target groups. Housing is a top priority of the current administration. We are determined to tackle the long-standing housing problems strategically, such as enhancing quantity, quality, speed, and efficiency in expanding land production for housing, building transitional housing and light public housing, setting up the working group on subdivided units, and vigorously combating abuses of public rental housing. According to estimates, the total housing demand for the next 10 years is 430,000 flats, and the government supply target is 440,000. Based on the 70-30 ratio, the target supply of public housing is 308,000, and that of the private sector is 132,000. The government will develop sufficient land to meet the 132,000 private housing target in the next 10 years. With the land supply doubling in the second 5-year period, we will examine, like Mr. Andrew LAM said, the timing and the scope for adjusting the ratio so as to plan ahead for new projects. We can contemplate the adjustment to the ratio of public-private units and also the ratio between the PRH and the SSF. We will plan our projects to tie in with future needs. As regards public housing supply, the current ratio of PRH and GHS and other subsidized flats is maintained at 70-30. We've heard the desire for an increased supply of subsidized sale flats. At present, the demand for PRH is still strong. The average waiting time for PRH as of 2023 is 5.8 years. What we need to do now is to increase the supply of conventional PRH and complete the 30,000 light public housing units by 27-28 to shorten the waiting time for the inadequately housed, to enable the grassroots long on the waiting list to be allocated PRH units, and to enable children in subdivided flats to grow up in a healthy manner. Peering ahead, we will see a significant increase in the supply of PRH units during the second 5-year period. That, as I said earlier on, will provide room for adjusting the ratio of PRH flats to subsidized sale flats. To prepare for this, we will conduct studies and listen to different views. The motion today, moved by Mr. Andrew LAM, is precisely a very good opportunity for us to do that, for us to formulate a set of realistic and visionary strategy. As for the private properties at the top rung of the housing ladder, it remains our important objective to maintain the healthy development of the private residential market. After careful consideration, the 2024-25 budget announced the lifting of all the demand-side management measures, i.e., on that day, all residential property transactions will no longer be subject to SSD, BSD, or NRSD. At the same time, the Hong Kong MA also announced the suspension of the stress test for property mortgage loans. We believe that these policies will facilitate home ownership so that young people and young families can plan for their future according to their own circumstances, choose the right pathways to home ownership to improve their lives. President, the existing home ownership ladder has evolved over the years to pragmatically meet different needs. In Hong Kong, given the interlocking nature of the ladder and any change will have a knock-on effect, we must tread carefully there. With an adequate land supply and a significant increase in public housing flats, the overall housing issue will be alleviated. We will be in a stronger position to formulate a more comprehensive and effective policy to assist the public. I believe that members will have a lot of valuable comments to offer. We will listen with an open mind, and I will certainly absorb members' comments in the formulation of policies. And I will make further response in my concluding remarks. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
佩良議員。
Mr. Chan Pui Lang. Madam Deputy, Deputy. Now, the government launched the long-term housing strategy in 2024. It proposed to increase the number of HOS and other subsidized sales flats, and there will be also timely demand-side management measures to stabilize the property market, and hopefully it could address the imbalance in the housing market eventually. Now, this is the 10th anniversary of the long-term housing strategy. I thank Mr. Andrew LAM for moving this motion. We can then consider together how we could review and enhance the long-term housing strategy and make sure people enjoy a happy home. Now, in the past few years, the government has been building more HOS, and it's also increased the different forms of subsidized house sales flats, such as making the white farm secondary market scheme permanent scheme, and then there's a home starter scheme, and so on. So instead of 3 levels, now we have 5 levels of housing ladder. I think the government is doing something right. This is to give hope to people to go up the housing ladder, but then it only gives them hope. If we want to address the housing issue at its core roots, we have to provide more housing. Now, there is a new housing ladder, but then there is insufficient land supply, so each year very few units are available, and it cannot really meet the needs of the public, and there's always oversubscription. Now the government has this new government has compressed the land from formation process, so there will be over 3,700 of hectares of land available in the next decade, and we've managed to reverse the exuberant property market. And then the government recently cancelled the demand-side management measures. Now, for a residence 2, which is a home starter's home, the response is much better. The average price is just $14,000 per square foot. It's not much different than the price of other private housing. And then there is a monthly income restriction, and there's also resale restriction, and so we can see why people are not keen to buy the e-residence flats now, or the home starter flats. Now, in the past, it was difficult to find enough land, but then in the past, in recent years, then there is cooling of the property market. Maybe it's now time for us to review whether the government's subsidized sale flats duplicate the housing ladder in the private market. Shall we go back to the original free layer of housing ladder, so we provide enough supply in at each level, and then people see there is hope for moving up the housing ladder? This is something government needs to consider very carefully. Now, when we had the free level of housing ladder, it's actually easy for the public to understand. At the time, it was not a problem with the system, but with supply. Now, then in 2018, HOS projects were delayed, and some of the projects were changed from HOS to green form HOS, and so there was a reduced supply of HOS flats. Now, the government shouldn't overlook the importance of HOS. It must ensure there is steady supply of HOS. This is a way to encourage PRX tenants to move up the housing ladder. And then for others who cannot afford private housing, they can go for HOS. It gives them hope. Thank you. Mr. Chen Kim Paul. Thank you, Deputy President. Property prices have gone down 20%, and it's easier for people to buy homes. And then the phase 3 of the home starter scheme of the URA was launched last week, and Mr. Andrew LAM is moving the motion today, and I also thank other members for moving amendments. This is an opportunity for us to discuss this issue of great concern to the public. Now, the home starter scheme is a good one. It's to help those who are not eligible for HOS but who couldn't afford the more expensive private housing. So it's for home, for first-time buyers. In recent years, property prices have come down. So so that's why for the home starter scheme, the flats are no longer as attractive because the price is similar to that in the private market. So maybe the government should review the scheme. Instead, we should free up the land for other purposes in promoting the housing ladder. Now, people always say that getting a HOS flat in the allocation exercise is more difficult than winning the Mark 6. And some told me they've tried many times trying to get HOS, they never succeeded. So I think the government should enhance the allocation system for HOS flats for households that have failed in the HOS allocation exercise for a number of times. They should be given priority, and then they see hope in home ownership. Many young people choose to lie flat. They just take up part-time jobs after graduation. Or in some households, they make sure one member does not work because they don't want to exceed the income limits for waitlisting for public rental housing. Because they are not able to get HOS, they can't afford private housing, so they determine to waitlist for public rental housing. So people no longer have a desire to move up the social ladder. This is something we need to consider. Now, for the Wake Form Secondary Market Scheme, the government issued over 1,800 offer letters to over 5,000 who have gained slots. So there's a small percentage. And then now the government has taken on board some members' suggestion to extend the mortgage default guarantee period to 50 years. So it will be easier for the secondary HOS markets to be more active. The government needs to monitor how the new measure affect the market. Now we should consider the needs of white form applicants and review the quota for white form secondary market scheme. Now, the government actually identified sufficient land for the housing needs in the next decade. In the next decade, we need about 310,000 units. Now the government has found more land than needed. In the private sector, there is also much land available. So because the government focuses on increasing land supply, I believe there will be even more land supply in future for meeting people whose housing needs, also for their desire to have better housing condition. Now we need to consider all factors, and the government should review the home ownership ladder, and then people can own their homes. Thank you.
Ms. Calvin Khan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I must declare that I'm a member of the Housing Authority. I thank Mr. Andrew LAM for moving the motion, the 4 other members for moving the amendments. Housing problem is a perennially difficult problem. President Xi reminded us that the aspiration for Hong Kong is for a better quality of life, for better housing. Honestly, the government is really determined. As the Secretary said, over the years, the government has been rolling out many different tiers of housing ownership to meet the demand, like the housing HOS, GHS, the Home Starter Loan Scheme, HOS SMS, and also the private SSF, that is a public-private participation. Why is it that people are still left behind? I agree with Mr. Tony J that perhaps it is time for us to review the ratio between public and private housing, and also the ratio between PRH and subsidized sale flats. The Secretary said earlier that when we come close to resolving the PRH issues, that is, by the time we get through the backloaded supply, it would be time for us to review this. I'd like the administration to review certain things. First, the pricing mechanism should be improved. In 2018 or before, the HOS prices were linked with the private market. It has been serving us well for 36 years. And in 2018, we saw the HOS units being sold at more than $10,000. So the government reviewed this pricing mechanism and packed this with the affordability. The pricing mechanism is not linked with the construction cost. Given the strong demand and soaring construction cost under the LTHS and also the backloaded supply in the PRH, we cannot lose sight of these factors. And we have to bear in mind the financial position of the Housing Authority. When the government reviews this policy, it should also have a look at the financial capability of the government. The government should really look at the subsidized sale units pricing mechanism, having regard to the cost instead of just focusing its attention on the affordability of the buyers. It would then enable to achieve the LTHS. As to the balloting system, I go along with what Mr. Tony J and Mr. Chen Kin-po said. I don't propose to be verbose here. Basically, I hope that the government should use more big data to serve the public. In terms of allocation, we should go beyond the scope of simple balloting, which is really a matter of luck, and we should devote the resources to those who are most in need. I agree with Mr. Chow Kwong that the government adopted the G19 proposal starting 1st of March. The mortgage default guarantee will be lengthened to 50 years minus age of building. Madam Deputy, the prospective buyers do not have a pretty good understanding of this arrangement. There should be a lot more explanation to do to make people aware that there would be better chance for them to secure a mortgage loan from the bank, and that would attract more green form applicants from the PRH to release the more units and to boost the turnover of the units. Now, for the 4,500 HOS SMS scheme, I think we have to have regard to the actual circumstances and increase the quota, or even do away with the quota altogether. And also the proof of affordability, so that people will not have to be scrambling for these units. And this will also boost the turnover between HOS and PRH. As the Safeguarding National Security Ordinance comes into effect, it is time for us to devote our attention to livelihood issues and address the aspirations of the public. Mr. Chen Ho-fong. Madam Chair, I speak in support of the motion moved by Mr. Andrew LAM to review the LTHS. The existing policy cannot really help people to get on the housing ladder and achieve upward mobility. To descend, the government should really have the objective of helping people get on the housing ladder. The LTHS doesn't really have the objective of helping people to own their own homes. Under the LTHS, it's all about the supply target. It's a matter of numbers instead of any commitment to home ownership. It is helping people to be allocated suitable and affordable housing. That this can be a rental unit or a sale unit, but the rental changes would give rise to a lot of uncertainties. I must emphasize that home ownership is the only condition for upward mobility. In the long term, compared with renting a unit, home ownership would certainly enable people to achieve social mobility and accumulate wealth. The previous administrations also put forward measures to help home ownership. In 2013, we had the four policy objectives. In 2017, we had all these four elements. But all these have not been incorporated into the LTHS, which doesn't really encourage home ownership or shorten the pathway to home ownership. In a way, it is really the opposite of home ownership. Now, with the LTHS, the ownership was 50.9, and 10 years on, the home ownership ratio dropped to 50.2. Over the past 10 years, the LTHS doesn't really encourage home ownership at all, as borne out by the numbers. The existing LTHS is the opposite of encouraging home ownership, because the LTHS has a formula for projecting the supply, which is bundled with the private sector housing. When the times are bad, it is acceptable to build more PRH. But with more PRH units, it doesn't mean that we have to reduce the number of HOS or private housing. When the times are bad, we run short of both PRH and private housing, and there is a reduction on both scores. When the prices soar, this ratio results in a situation where the private housing cannot catch up with the demand. And for the first-time buyers, they are really priced out of the market. So to shorten the pathway to home ownership, we have to review the LTHS, and home ownership should be given top priority in the LTHS, and review the land supply. At the beginning of the handover, there was a ratio of 70%, but for some reason that policy fell by the wayside. Last week, I moved a motion about the housing issue, that there was an important policy vehicle that is rent-to-buy policy. The government has stopped this because of ownership, because of other issues. The government is not really pursuing this policy. I hope that the government should really consider the TPS scheme to boost the ownership so that people can really achieve upward mobility. So I speak. Ms. Chen Yutming. Madam Deputy, I speak to support Mr. Andrew LAM's motion to review the long-term housing strategy to shorten the home ownership ladder. The LTHS is a long-term policy regarding housing. This is some supply-led policy with a 10-year rolling supply program regarding the PRH and HOS for the medium and low-income families. Last week, I moved an amendment to the motion, which was carried. Basically, this is pulling in the same direction as this particular motion. Basically, we like more people to own their own homes to achieve upward mobility. There are 2 points I'd like to make today. First, we have to review the long-term housing strategy. We have to bear in mind the downside risk economically. In 1998, the global financial turmoil sparked a reduction in interest rate, and there was a loosening of liquidity. There was a huge demand in the property market. There was a lot of speculation. Now we have seen another change in the economic situation. There is the geopolitical dynamics, and there is a change to the flow of capital, and there is a drop in the confidence in 2023. The price level has gone down to the 2017 level, and the government has lifted all the cooling measures. And this also has reduced the government's receipts from land sale by $65 billion. Given the fiscal deficits, the government infrastructure is going to be hitting the peak in the coming 3 years. Each year, the expenditure will be up by 17% compared with the previous years. When we review the LTHS, the government ought to adopt a far-sighted attitude to guard against the downside risk. We have seen overspend, and over budget, and so on. That we are moving into the peak of infrastructural development. The review of the LTHS is really appropriate. I think we have to cut spending and raise revenue and make available all the spade-ready land for future development. The other thing is to improve people's livelihood and help people move up the housing ladder. The government's building the HOS to help the low and medium income family. For the young people and savaged people, the government should give them some assistance, and PRH should not be the ultimate aim for young people. The people would like to have their families, they need to have decent accommodation, so subsidized sale flats would be the way to go, and this is also a way to boost social stability. In this regard, I urge the administration to adjust the ratio between public and private housing. In particular, we have to increase the amount of GHS. More green form applicants should be encouraged to purchase secondary or second-hand HOS and release the original PRH units. And that would not really reduce the amount of PRH. I see that in Shan Tin, Technopole, and Lau Fao Shan, they will be testing the mix of public and private housing, and there would be more flexibility. I think the government should take advantage of this opportunity to scale it back to a 60-40 to address the demand and help with an upward mobility. So I speak.
主席。
Ms. Dorian Kong, President, I support the original motion of Mr. Andrew Lam. I would like to thank other members for their amendments. In the original motion, it is said that the government should shorten the home ownership ladder and help members of the public to move upward. This has pinpointed the actual situation in Hong Kong. Home ownership is the way for upward mobility for grassroots families. The government has rolled out different housing policies, and the government said that they would increase the supply of PRH units. This will help solve the housing issue. But to solve the deep-seated issue of Hong Kong, when can we do that? This is a difficult task for the government, and that is why we've been discussing the housing issue time and again in the Legislative Council. We have a series of housing policies in Hong Kong. Instead, I think that there are too many, and we don't see results in solving our housing issue. The government has rolled out the long-term housing strategy to make a 10-year projection of housing supply, but I think a long-term strategy will have elements of circulation. Public housing policy should not incorporate only the government allocating housing to people, and we need to encourage people to work hard. I wonder where the housing ladder is for the people. The crux of the problem is that for government, the ultimate goal of the housing ladder is unclear. The government has been ignoring the need of subsidized sale flat, and that is why there is a gap in the housing ladder, and PRH units households cannot get hold of a flat. And the role played by SSF units is being more and more insignificant. We need to boost the turnover of SSF and PRH. With the long-term housing strategy, the government can project the future supply of PRH and private housing. But if the projection is wrong, then the result will be dire, and construction of housing takes time. The strategy based on a wrong projection would be problematic, and the issues will only be discovered over the long run. I think that we have to have a supplementary policy on top of the long-term housing strategy. On top of that, the government will have to review the housing strategy that we have. The efficiency of the housing authority and housing society is low. The housing authority and society should not be competing with the private developers. Instead, they should work together. The government should work in the interest of the public, and they should leverage on the market power of private developers, and they should encourage private developers to develop public housing for people. For public housing for rent and for sale, the supply of it is in the hand of the government. To solve the problem, we need to have private sector participate in the construction of public housing so that the housing department can focus on public housing for rent. The government should encourage the private sector to participate in the construction of public housing for the benefit of the people, so that we can solve the deep-seated issue. Thank you. Mr. Kitson Yang. Thank you, President. I speak in support of the motion moved by Mr. Andrew LAM to shorten the home ownership ladder and help members of the public to move upward. The problem with housing in Hong Kong is that we don't have enough supply of land. We need time to construct land, and the housing supply is backloaded in Hong Kong. For us to have a home ownership with people, we need to have sufficient land, and we have to allocate scarce resources of land and supply of housing. And we need to have a housing ladder. For PRH units, they would move upward by buying a green farm HOS unit and then SSF and then private housing. We have to solve the problem of turnover. First, for HOS units, it plays a very important role. But a lot of owners of HOS units were afraid of not being able to purchase another flat after selling their flats. And there are more and more people getting the white form to purchase flats in the secondary market. I think that this is a problem with power. If the government empowered the owner of the white form secondary market scheme holder purchase a flat without paying premium, then they will be more willing to sell their flat. And that will revitalize the white farm secondary market so that HOS unit holders can buy another flat of a larger size and minimize the possibility of speculation. And I think that this right should be accorded to all SSF unit holder. As long as the HOS unit owners sell the flat to white farm holder, then they should not need to pay the land premium. By this, we can revitalize the turnover of the SSF, and that people will see possibility of upward mobility. So that as long as people have the ability, they can purchase a private housing, and this will increase the supply of subsidized sale flat. And people or members have been talking about the PRH units household getting a green farm or HOS or SSF units. Now the turnover rate stood at only 1.5%. According to a study, 5% of the PRH units take action. In 2022, 49,000 green farm holders fought over 3,500 HOS units. PRH unit households want to purchase a flat, but they cannot do so because the supply of subsidized sale flat is too low and the private housing is too expensive. That is why so many young people choose to lie flat and queue for public rental housing. And as a result, the PRH households stay where they are. I think the government policy is one with good intent, but actually the policy encourage people to lie flat. The PRH households will only have their asset reviewed once every 10 years. Actually, they can accumulate enough wealth for purchase of a private housing in 10 years. Now, the review period is shortened to 2 years. By this, the PRH households would choose to actually lie flat and control their income. I think that we need to encourage PRH households to get hold of a subsidized sale flat, and we have to increase the supply of green farm subsidized home ownership units and encourage them to make available their flats for people on the waiting list for PRH units. Also, I think that the government should review the ratio of PRH to SSF in public housing. It used to be 7:30, and now it's still 7:30. I think that we should review the ratio of PRH to SSF and GXSH so that people can buy a flat and solve the housing issue. President, I so submit. Ms. Nixie Lam. Thank you, Deputy President. There are a number of ways to shorten the home ownership ladder. I want to focus on our young people so that we can think about how we can help them and give them hope to get them on the housing ladder. Young people are unable to afford private housing, and they don't know where to start. Some people ask young people to stop traveling and not purchase designer goods in order to save up for a flat. A lot of young people told me that they choose not to save because it's useless. In 2011 to 12, the government rolled out this youth hostel scheme for young people to have a flat before purchasing one. I became a mother last year, but I still am unable to see the scheme realized. There are some projects that have been completed. There is a youth hostel in Yunlong. There was a philanthropist who donated a youth hostels, and there was another hotel that's been developed into a youth hostels, and there's another project where a hostel or hotel have several floors redeveloped into youth hostels. I think that this is a great start, but I have worries. I wonder if the units will be occupied. Now, the scheme focuses on encouraging the young people to broaden their horizon when they are staying at the youth hostels. If you look at the home ownership issue, the problem lies with money. I think that we need to help young people save up for down payment to purchase a flat. Youth hostel is a springboard for young people. We need to help them plan and save. The young people should not stop at staying at a youth hostel. There are other fees to pay, including utilities fee and so on. So I think that we need to help young people with financial planning. The government have gathered a group of charitable people and philanthropists to offer adequate housing for young people with no clear saving plan. It's likely that 3 years later, young people who have stayed in youth hostels would go back to where they were, and they would go back to the subdivided units where they were staying at. I think that we need to give hope to people, especially young people in Hong Kong. That is why we have to help young people save, and perhaps we can create some kind of scheme on loans to help people get a mortgage. Young people, if they want to start a family, they need to have a home. Even if they can be allotted a home under the GHS, they need to save for a down payment, and they don't want to have a small flat. And they need space for the babies if they want to have one. The government in the GHS has offered flats of a larger size. I think that this is a good start, and I hope that the government will also provide more flats of more rooms and think about allocating flats for young people who want to start a family so that they can plan for the future. Thank you, President. So submit.
Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. I thank Mr. Andrew Lam for his motion and the other members for their amendments. In December 2014, the SL government announced the long-term housing strategy. It's going to adopt a multi-pronged approach to increase land and housing supply. In the near term, is to review land use and increase land development density appropriately. And then for medium and long-term strategy is about developing new areas and reclamation. Now there's some progress report in 2022 to 23 the target of housing supply is 440,000 units. The ratio between private and public housing is 30 to 70. So that means so in public sector is going to provide about 300,000 units, and then for the ratio, so the ratio it remains 70 to 30 between PRH and subsidized sale flats. So there are 3 levels of the housing ladder: public housing, public rental housing, subsidized sales flats, and private housing. Then for subsidized flats that or public rental housing that covers or subsidized sales flats that covers the housing authorities, HOS, and the tenants purchase scheme, and then Hong Kong Society and the URA also provide subsidized sale flats. And by March 2023, there are about 15% of total housing in Hong Kong that's subsidized sales flats. Now, I'm a member of the Housing Authority. I need to declare that. The current term government has said that housing is the top priority for the government. The government will review the long-term housing strategy from time to time to find out about the housing needs of different sectors, especially for young people in the sandwich class. There is need to find out about the housing needs. Many in the community have put forward various suggestions. For example, in reviewing the housing production ratio between public and private housing, and then for public housing, there is also need to review the ratio between PRH and SSF. But then for Hong Kong, the crux of the issue is about insufficient supply, so it's not about adjusting the ratio. It's not going to resolve the matter. BP has always been concerned about housing supply and land supply. We have offered various suggestions to the government over the years. We believe we need to address the issue at the core. So else have put forward near-term measures. Now, the government's has decided on a multi-pronged approach to increase housing and land supply, and also for average living space per person should be increased from about also be increased, and then the government speeding up the Northern Metropolis project, but then it should also allow development at the periphery of country parks. There is need to substantially develop lands in the new territories. The government should also improve urban planning and speed up urban renewal. There's also need to redevelop old public housing estates as soon as possible. The whole redevelopment process should be streamlined. The government should also enhance the role of the Urban Renewal Authority. So for land resumed, it should be used for developing SSFs. Now, as there is increasing a gradual increase in supply of land and housing, there is a better condition for government to review the housing ladder. We need to take into account the needs of the middle class and young people for housing. There should be the enhanced first-time home buyers loan scheme and so on. The government should also work with developers to build small and cheap housing units. So so these will be units people can either rent or buy. That's the first step for young people towards home ownership, and then they will have a stronger sense of belonging to society. I so speak. Mr. Frankie Ng. Thank you. Now, in the past 20 years, property prices kept soaring. Well, in recent days, the property market has cooled a bit. Prices come down a bit, but still, to young people, the housing is still unaffordable. Now, in his first policy address, Mr. John Lee put forward various measures on youth housing, including the starter home scheme, youth hostels, and so on. Now, these measures have been in place for over a year. So how effective are they? Is it easier for young people to buy homes now? There's a recent study report. Now, for those we look at that looks at the wage increase. Now, property prices have gone up 13 times, and for rent, the index gone up 2.8 times. So young people are finding housing increasingly unaffordable. In the NT, the price is about 74% of the income of a fresh graduate. 10 years ago, it was about 20-something%. So that means compared to 10 years ago, the burden is even heavier for young people if they want to buy their homes. So it's, with high property prices, young people don't even dare to start a family, and then many people become rather negative. Some say that if they don't eat, they don't do anything, they still cannot afford to buy a home after 10 years or 20 years. So instead, they rather go for a lower paid job so they could apply for public rental housing. Now, property prices may have come down a little, but it's still not it's too high for young people. So it's necessary that we help young people to buy homes, especially for sandwich class youth. Now they can't afford to private housing; they exceed the income limit, and they are not eligible for public rental housing or youth hostel. So the only way out for them is HOS. But then the oversubscription rate is so high, so there's no way they can realize their dream. So the DAB is always asked the government to expand the youth hostel scheme. This allows young people to move into their own space at a lower than market rent, and then they could save up for buying a home. But then there's still plenty of room to improve the youth hostel scheme. Right now, the rent is set at about 60% of market rent, so it's $4,000 to $5,000 per month. And then after paying all the expenses, then young people don't have much left from their income. There's no way they could save for their first home. So the government should help young people to save. And when they leave, half of the rent should be returned to young people. So this will be used, can be used as the down payment for a flat. And then the Home and Youth Affairs Bureau is in charge of the youth hostel scheme, so it may not see eye to eye with the Housing Bureau's policy on housing. That's why youth hostels should be handed over to the Housing Bureau for management. And then the 5-year period is too short. We propose to extend the period to 8 to 10 years, so young people have enough time to save up for their down payment. There are some 2,000 youth hostel units now. And then each year we have 15,000 university graduates, so that's a drop in the market. I hope the government will speed up its youth hostel scheme, and then there should be involvement of the private sector more, so more such youth hostels would be made available, especially those in the urban areas. And then for young people, the government should offer tax concessions. For first-time home buyers, they should be exempted from stamp duty, and then there should be 15,000 SSFs each year. Government should make good use of existing housing resources to rebuild the home ownership ladder. Now, if most young people can't afford to buy their homes, they cannot share in the fruits of economic success. And then we see there is a wider gap between those who are homeowners and those who are not. So the government needs to roll out more measures to help young people buy their homes. I so speak. Mr. Scott Leung. Thank you, Deputy President. The government has a rolling 10-year housing production target, and then it also has a certain ratio for private and public housing in response to the aspirations of the people. Over the years, the government's been adjusting this ratio and the supply target. And then for there's also change to the targets for different types of public and private housing. For example, GSH has become a regular program, and at the time, adjustment was made to the ratio. Considering the interchangeability of HOS and GSH, and also GSH targets those on eligible applicants on the waiting list, and those. So that's why that scheme is the Green Farm subsidized home ownership scheme. And then there's a relaxation of the unit size of GSH to respond to people's aspiration for better housing condition. I think in the long run, I would propose classifying GSH as other types of SSF. It should not be linked to HOS, but then there should be coordination in the supply of HOS and GSH. And then the eligibility criteria ought to be adjusted too, based on the current needs. The government must also make it clear to the public that in the next 5 years, the number of SSF units to be made available, including the number of GSH units, location of these units, so people could plan better. At the beginning of the year, the Housing Authority has done a projection. It will be under immense financial pressure because of the many projects it's going to embark upon. So in the next 5-year period of the LTS HS, there's actually room for to adjust the ratio of public and private housing, or PRH and SSF. Right now, the ratio is 70-30. In the second 5 year of the LTHS, the government should increase the PRH to SSH ratio to 50-50, and SSF should cover both HOS and GSH. Now, the average waiting time for PRH is gradually coming down, so the government could review the reference ratio further even in future. Last year, the Housing Authority approved relaxing the mortgage default guarantee period for eligible applicants. They can get higher mortgage amount under the White Form Secondary Market Scheme. So for people buying HOS or those buying second-hand HOS, they will still enjoy this mortgage guarantee. And then the about 40% or 50% of the quotas were used up in previous years, and now with policy intervention, I think the ratio will go up further. Now, we can see from the WSM application figures, most applicants are one-person households. So therefore, the government should give more quota places to one-person household applicants. SSF are meant for those who could not afford private housing and who are not eligible for PRH. Now, in the GSH and WSM or HOS, each time there is tens of times of oversubscription. That means there is strong demand for these units. Now, SSFs are also invaluable housing resources. We need to make sure they put to good use. We must not allow speculation. So we need to increase supply. We also need to increase the circulation of SSFs in the market. The government needs to consider that. In the long run, between the private and the public housing market, there should be segregation. That means we should not allow people to pay land premium and then sell SSFs in the private market. I hope with such enhancement measures, there will be healthy development of the SSF market, and this will become the first step of the housing ladder. Thank you.
Mr. Chen Shihong. Madam Deputy, I speak in gratitude to Ms. Andrew LAM and in support of Ms. Andrew LAM's original motion and the amendments. According to the Rating Evaluation Department, compared with 2021, we have seen a drop of 23% in property prices. The university graduates are still unable to afford the property prices. Many said that they still find it difficult to get on the housing ladder despite the easing of the market. The government should really increase the supply of SSFs. Madam Deputy, according to the LTHS, the guiding principles are flexibility and supply-led. There would be more SSFs to be provided, and the government will provide adequate land to address the mismatch in supply and demand. The housing ladder is composed of the PRH, HOS, and private housing. The government is increasing the SSF's variety. There is a GHS and starter home loan scheme. Now for GSH, the applicants are not able to afford the HOS. The government should increase the turnover in the PRH market. And there are many people who cannot afford the private housing, and this will provide an opportunity for these people. And we actually have 5 tiers of the housing ladder. During the colonial days, they rolled out the policy to address the housing problems in Hong Kong. But the PRH as a means to boost upward mobility doesn't seem to be working. In the 1980s, 90s, people enjoy a political opportunity to get on the housing ladder. Over the past 20 years, we have seen a very limited development in the economy, and the HOS has become the protection for the people. And the sandwich class, sandwich housing is a case in point. The amendments propose that we should adjust the ratio between the public and private housing. I support that. Since the revision of LTHS in 2018, the ratio between public and private has been adjusted to 70-30 from 60-40. The government said that this is to increase the public housing supply to meet the demand and also to meet the aspiration. In 2045 to 2033, for the 10-year supply, it will remain at 70-30. The government said that it will review the ratio. I think the government is not bold enough to touch this ratio because a lot of people's interests are at stake. The Secretary for Housing said that many young people started queuing up for PRH at a young age. Sometimes they ask for a pay cut in order to be eligible for PRH. Why is it the young people are so unmotivated because they want to get into PRH? Why are they focusing their attention on PRH? Young people would start queuing up for PRH at a young age. Is it because of the results of the 70-30 ratio? This is the right time for us to review the LTHS. Instead of blindly pursuing the market forces, we have to lead the market. We have to have a housing ladder to help people move up the housing ladder. So we should not be really focusing simply on the PRH. Thank you. Mr. Shanghai Long. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I thank Mr. Andrew LAM's motion to urge the administration to review the LTHS and shorten the home ownership ladder. Housing is one of the top priorities in Hong Kong. Many people have to rely on the government's housing policy to address the housing needs. And people are enslaved to their own properties. This is the 12th year in Hong Kong, where Hong Kong is really a place where the property prices are ill-affordable. People will have to spend 12, 13 years without eating, without doing anything to get on the housing ladder. The supply and demand will also have a bearing on the property prices. The LTHS was proposed in 2014. There are 3 objectives. We have to increase PRH. Second, we have to provide more subsidized sale flats to enrich the choice and to boost the turnover. Third, we should have stable land supply to stabilize the property market. I noticed that in the LTHS annual report, there is a principle to move on with times. I think we have to shorten the waiting time. I think there should be dedicated sessions to discuss this issue. This policy is really supply-led and flexible. The prices are actually decided by the government at a discount. If we don't increase the SSF supply, people may be able to afford. They are not able to get on the housing ladder. Indeed, we need to review the LTHS to respond to the public needs. In 2018, the government adjusted the public-private housing to 70-30, 70% public, 30 private housing. In the public housing, the PLH and the SSF is also 70-30. This ratio has been maintained. In particular, in the northern metropolis, there will be a great deal of public housing supply. And if we have a shortage there, the waiting time would be long, and the homeownership ladder will be getting ever longer. So I think there should be an adjustment of the ratio from 70-30 to 50-50 or 60-40 in order to shorten the homeownership ladder to allow more opportunity for those who can afford it. For the private housing, the property prices have come down, and private housing is not simply a question of the asset value. The fluctuation in the prices would be making a difference to people's desire to own their own homes. I think the government should make adjustment in accordance with inflation. We have to leave the prices to the market. The only thing the government can do is to adjust the land supply and also the public housing supply. We have seen volatility in the private housing market. Some said that the immigration wave would increase the second-hand market and the property prices will come down. Now, this is a matter of supply and demand. We have the top talent scheme, and they are potential buyers. And in some other jurisdictions, they are revising the immigration policy and the tax policy. There are many Hong Kong people who have emigrated, potentially coming back. So the government should maintain the stability of the market. There should be a homeownership ladder that should be shorter. People do aspire to get on the housing ladder. I think the younger generation should be given an opportunity to get on the housing ladder to instill a sense of well-being. This certainly would be conducive to long-term development and stability of Hong Kong. I support Mr. Lam's motion and all the amendments. Ms. Jovi Chan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. Housing is a top priority for the current administration. This is also something dear to the heart of LegCo members. For 2 weeks in a row, we have motions and moved to debate the housing issue. I'm grateful to Mr. Lam for moving this motion. I'd like to focus my attention on the youth home ownership. HTLS has been around for 10 years now. There was a report on the affordability, the International Housing Affordability Report. Hong Kong families, it would take them 19 years, not eating, not doing anything, to own their own homes. For 13 years, Hong Kong is the most unaffordable city in terms of housing. I'm not sure whether we can achieve this dubious distinction again. Now, the problem with housing problem is that the salaries cannot keep pace with the house prices. The home ownership has seen a reduction. In 2011, it was 52.1%. It's come down to 48.2% 6% in 2021. Those below 35, the ownership ratio has come down dramatically from 22.1%, dramatically coming down to 7.6%. For the starter home, the average age is 44 years of age. So young people are really priced out of the housing market. They don't really have any hope. We do have some statistics to support that. There is a study that showed that for the youth hostels, people will have to earn below $25,000 between the age of 18 and 35. There are certain restrictions there. They will be there for 5 years. The youth hostel will offer you some rent discount, and you will be able to save some money. And the savings would be something like $170,000 to $350,000. Given the still high property prices, if you want to acquire a non-nano flat, it would be you would need $500 million in down payment. You may be living in a youth hostel for some time, and you've made some savings. it is difficult for you to acquire a property in the private market to improve your lot. So for young people, the only option available to them would be the nano flats, and the quality of life will be worse instead. So PRH will be their lifelong aspiration. And this also affects the productivity. This is very much a vicious circle. Madam Deputy, I'm sure a lot of people have shared with us that it is difficult to hire people in Hong Kong. I'd like to share with you some real-life experience. In my ward office, I like to hire some part-timers. It is terribly difficult. There is a 35-year-old youth who came for interview. He said he would like to work part-time, and he'd like to get paid in cash. And he doesn't really want to get promoted. Now, this kind of phenomenon is pretty much the common occurrence. Young people do have their own anxieties. In Singapore, however, they also have their anxieties, but this is a happy anxiety. They have a stable income, and they pay the Central Provident Fund. They don't have to be worried about whether they can get a housing ladder. The only concern is whether they get the right choice. In Singapore, they have the Central Provident Fund, which is not similar to the MPF. The FTU, our President, Mr. Stanley, moved the amendment to urge the government to increase the supply of private housing, and we are proposing that there should be a home ownership fund for people to purchase uncompleted HOS flats to help young people get on the housing ladder and to move up in society. President Xi said on July 1st that he's very concerned about the home ownership among the young people. For young people to move up the housing ladder, it would be helpful to society. Thank you.
Mr. Tang Fei. President, I speak in support of the original motion of Mr. Andrew Lam and the amendments moved by other members. Housing issue is very important. Land and housing are very important to the Chinese. We are always worried of not having a roof above our heads. Regarding the progress report of the long-term housing strategy promulgated by the government, a number of measures have been stated, but there are 2 points that I'm confused about. First, why do we have to change the public-private housing split from 6:4 to 7:3? And also, the government set the ratio of PRH to SSF at also 70:30. So is this the goal of the government? Is the government trying to subsidize people to purchase public housing? Is the government according a lower priority to rental housing and private housing? According to the Progress Report 2023 of the Long-Term Housing Strategy, the government set the public-private housing split at 70-30. If we want to help people get hold of a flat to improve their living environment and to help young people to get hold of a private housing, I think that this ratio is quite confusing. If the housing split is to help people accumulate wealth to purchase a flat, then I think with the increase of income of people, they should be able to move up the housing ladder. I think that we should raise the ratio of subsidized sale flat and the private housing, and then in time we should lower the ratio of public housing. Otherwise, we cannot explain the fact that the government actually tried to encourage people to own a home. Although the waiting time for PRH has shortened, but the ratio of public housing still stands at 70%. So I wonder what the long-term housing strategy of the government is. And I would like to ask about the goal of having the split. And along with other members, I also think that we should review the public-private housing split. And I think that we should tie the housing split with our goal to help young people purchase a flat. Otherwise, the housing split would not be meaningful. My second point. I don't think that we have to illustrate our property or income gap with figures. The financial secretary said that we have a structural problem. We have less taxpayers, but the tax revenue has gone up. With less taxpayer and higher tax revenue, it means that we have a larger income gap or wealth gap. I hope that the U.S. will lower the interest rate, even if we disregard that. Even if the parents of the young people can help them pay the down payment, I wonder how many people can actually pay the mortgage. Apart from the public-private housing split of 70-30 and increased land supply, what other measures do we have to help young people make mortgage payment to purchase a flat? My last point. Apart from increasing land supply, well, the government said that they will be increasing the supply of land. If we, even if we cannot cease housing or property speculation altogether, I wonder if the property price of the housing can be stabilized. Your time is up. Thank you. Dr. Wendy Hong, President. I agree with the proposals to review long-term housing strategy as set out in the motion and amendments, but I don't think that we should shorten the home ownership ladder, because the rung in the middle of the ladder is to help people who cannot afford private housing. I think that we should offer subsidized sale flat to offer sandwich class people another choice. If we give up HOS and starter homes, then it will limit the choices for sandwich class people. But I agree with the general direction of the long-term housing strategy. We should encourage upward mobility of people. But I think that the long-term housing strategy is not forward-looking enough, and it lacks a soul. I think that we should adjust the housing split of 70-30 and roll out a genuinely long-term strategy to meet our target. To put it simply, I think that we have to review the supply-demand imbalance. I think that we should project the housing demand based on our population growth. Our policy is often demand-driven. The government look at the demand in the market to draw up their supply target. There is one benefit to this, which is that the government will be able to meet the needs of the market. But we don't very often think if the demand is reasonable and the consequences of meeting such a demand. And also, if we should change the demand and how to do that. The construction of PRH units will tie our resources up for 50 years. So before we construct PRH, I think that we should think about what the housing situation would be like in 50 years. And I think we should have to think about how many people will be able to purchase a flat. And we should think about our vision and our strategy. How do we meet the market demand and lead the demand? Unfortunately, the relevant issues has not been touched on in the long-term housing strategy. The government is only trying to balance the supply and demand. If we say that balancing supply and demand is our vision, I think that the vision is a rather short-term one. The property prices has been going up, and the waiting time for PRH and public housing has lengthened. In 2018, the government reviewed the housing split of 70-30. As a result, the government's policy tilted in favor of public housing, and they tried to meet the KPI of public housing to shorten the waiting time for PRH. We actually don't lack PRH, but we need another rung above PRH in the housing ladder, and the turnover of PRH is too low. A lot of sandwich class people actually move downward. A lot of resources have been tied in the waiting list of PRH. Our housing strategy is very short-sighted. A lot of people have become grassroots families and people who rely on PRH units, and they stifle our development. I think that we can actually create and adjust our demand. We need to put in place real policies to lead market demand. I think that we should adjust our allocation of resources so that people can move up the housing ladder. I think that we should reallocate the resources put in the PRH to encourage young people move upward and create a larger group of middle-class people and create an olive-shaped society. Thank you. Mr. Vincent Chang. I would like to thank Mr. Lam for the original motion to ask the government to review the long-term housing strategy to shorten the home ownership ladder. Now, we've been discussing the housing strategy 2 weeks in a row. Now we ask the government to review the long-term housing strategy. I think that we should do so, and that's what the DAB advocate as well. I hope that we can supply more PRH units and allow people to get hold of one in 3 years. It's hard for people to purchase a flat, and this term of the government is determined to increase the housing supply. And the government has already identified sufficient land to provide 410,000 public housing units, and they have shortened the town planning procedures for site formation. And the government can shorten the waiting time for PRH to 4.5 years. I support the strategy. In 2014, the government formulated the framework, and they have adjusted it. They have adjusted the public and private housing split to 70-30, but I think that it's time for the government to review the strategy again to enrich the housing ladder so that people can purchase a flat at a reasonable price. I have a few suggestions. First, This is an infographics illustrating the housing ladder of Hong Kong. We start off with public housing, GHS, and then we move on to HOS, starter homes, and private housing eventually. Under this ladder, the government add this transitional housing rung. I hope that for transitional housing and light public housing, they can become another rung in the housing ladder so that people living in inadequate housing can live at transitional and light public housing, and that we can provide another option outside of subdivided units. And the government is trying to eradicate substandard subdivided units, and they're listening to the views of the stakeholders. I hope that we can have a licensing regime for the subdivided units to eradicate substandard subdivided units, so that subdivided units can become another option for people. My third suggestion, I think that we should peg the supply of SSF with the 3-year target, and this is what the DAB has been advocating as well. I hope that we can adjust the supply of public housing. I noticed that there is not a mention of a home ownership scheme under the long-term housing strategy. A lot of people or members talked about home ownership with young people. The government have a target to provide 15,000 HOS flats per year. But looking at the record of the sale of HOS flats in 2013 to 16, the number of zero. Every year, the government could only supply 9,000 HOS flats. It's difficult for young people to be allocated an HOS flats, and they find other ways to purchase a flat. So for HOS and GHS, I hope that the government can review the schemes. There are other ways to shorten the home ownership ladder. As mentioned, I think that we should roll out the tenant purchase scheme again. I hope that the government can consider it seriously. Thank you. I speak in support of the original motion of Mr. Andrew Lam and the amendments of other members, because there are a number of enhancement measures mentioned, and I support them. Thank you. President, I so submit.
Mr. Lai Tong Kok. I thank Mr.